The first two questions are review from slope-intercept form. So if you have not done the first two questions, pause the video and do those now. On the first question, you should be using your y-intercept at -2, which would be this point, and then your slope is 7/2, so you should be going up 7 and right 2 and drawing your line. For question 2, your y-intercept is at +3 and your slope is -6, so I changed that into a fraction by putting it over 1. So the -6 tells me to go down 6 and the +1 tells me to go right 1. Okay, so now getting into new stuff, graphing from point slope form. So just a reminder, point slope form looks like this: y minus y sub 1 equals m, and then in parentheses x minus x sub 1. Here's our first equation. So what you want to do first is you want to pull out the slope and the y, or the slope and the point. So what you're going to see is that if they have changed this from a +1, you're always going to do the opposite to pull it out and go backwards. So my x coordinate is a -1 since it's opposite. This says -3, and I'm going to do the opposite of that, so I'm going to pull out a +3. So the point that I would actually plot is -1, 3. The slope is straightforward. It's the one that's in front of that parenthesis. So my slope is 2, or 2 over 1 if you like to write it as a fraction. So if I was going to graph this, I would plot this point first. So reminder, if I'm plotting that point, -1, +3 means I'm going to go to -1 on the x-axis and then up to +3 on the y-axis. So here is that point. Then I'm going to go up 2 and over 1 to get to the next point. You can keep doing that if you would like, or you can also go in the other direction by going down 2 and left 1. Okay, let's try one more of those. So here's my equation. Remember, I'm going to do the opposite to pull out my point. So the x coordinate is pulled from here. So since it says -3, I'm going to do +3. My y coordinate is pulled from here. Since it says +1, I'm going to do a -1. So the point that I would plot would be 3, -1. Then I'm going to pull out my slope, which is this -1/2. So I'm going to plot the point. So I would go right 3, down 1 to plot my first point. Then I would need to use my slope to find the next point. So since it's -1, I go down 1, and it's +2, so I go right 2. You're going to pause the video and try the next two. On the next one, your point that you pulled out should be +1 and +2, so make sure you're doing the opposites. Then your slope should be 3 over 1. So I would plot the point 1, 2, so I go right 1, up 2, and then my slope is +3, so that tells me to go up 3 and right 1. Checking the next one. Your point should be at +4 because I'm doing the opposite, and it should be at -3 for the y coordinate. My slope is the -1/3. So I plot my point for -3. So I go right 4, down 3. So here would be my point. Then I'm going to use my slope, -1 over 3, to find the next point and draw in my line. So with point slope, you always have to do the opposite in order for you to come up with the coordinates. Alright, the next part is super easy, but you got to remember which one is which. So we're going to do horizontal and vertical lines. Y equals 3. That's actually meaning, if I were to do a table, that all of the y coordinates of my points would be at 3. So if I just put in numbers here for the x's and I plotted these points, they would be right here along this line. Whoops. So the shortcut is that you can go to the y-axis, put a point at 3, but then you need to make sure that you draw in the line crossing through that axis. So y equals 3 is a horizontal line going through at 3. Same thing can be said with the x's. If my x's says it's equal to -4, that means all of the points on that line have to be x equaling -4. So if I just put in numbers for my y coordinates and I plot those points, they would be all along this line. So the trick is, if it's x equaling -4, I put a point at -4, but I got to make sure I draw a line all the way through that axis. All right, your turn. Pause the video and try the next two. So for number 9, you should have a line crossing through the x-axis at 2. And on number 10, you should have a horizontal line crossing the y-axis at -1. All right, that's it for graphing, reviewing slope-intercept, point-slope, standard form, and then horizontal vertical lines.